welcome you again to another GRIP-Birkman Coaches Cafe. We get together every month for dialogues about how we can help people as individuals and teams build unity in the body of Christ. And today we're talking about helping those individuals and teams build resilience. And although John Blake wrote the article, let's give credit where credit is due, but Matt Blake, John's brother, is going to be the point person in this dialogue. Matt, as the pastor of an international church in the Czech Republic, is joining us. We are really thankful for the miracle that Zoom allows us to be in real time and without any significant lag. So Matt, let's dive into the article that we were reading about helping teams to build resiliency and what resiliency means really in ministry. That definition that came to us from the APA, resilience is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility and adjustment to external and internal demands. That's a mouthful of a definition.
Nice.
So we really do need to break it down into its parts there. Talking about this being a process and how we as GRIP-Birkman coaches can relate to that process of building resilience. Matt, help us to think through that just a moment of how is this a process? How is resilience a process, first of all?
Yeah, I think John did a great job kind of breaking this down in the article. I think you're right. I think it's key to recognize that this is not a skill that you learn and you're done with. It's not a course that you go through and you graduate from, but it is this ongoing process of building into our lives. And then I think evaluating, we'll get into that a little bit, where we are in that. And when we don't, when we cut short the process or we step out of the process in the journey, then that's, I think, where we run into some of the statistics that we're hearing, or maybe cases that some of all of us maybe know of, where people just feel like, I can't anymore for whatever reason. I just can't. I've got to step away. I got to finish this. I'm not able to carry on like I really would like to.
So if we're not building the resilience over a process of time, then what's the outcome going to be?
I think we all go through seasons, right? So that's just normal in life, that we go through seasons when we're refreshed, everything's going good, fruitful. Maybe we're seeing growth. Maybe we're seeing personal growth, team growth, ministry growth. We go through seasons where that's not the case. So I don't think that is that's a pretty normal thing that goes on in life. Needs to, actually. I think we need to go through seasons like that. I think, though, that when we step out of the process of building in appropriately, what happens is that when tough times, that's where it's going to say, it's when difficult and challenging times come that we've been in, right? These last few years, when those come and we haven't been building into the process, then we don't have anything to pull from or to land back on. And I say that as Christians, we feel like, well, that's not an excuse, right? We all have God's word. We all have that firm foundation. We all have those things. But truth is, if we haven't been building into these things, just because it ought to be there doesn't mean that it functionally is in our life. It's this process that we have to continue to think about. I think we're more aware of it right now because we see, or maybe we're experiencing ourselves, the real struggle to stay and to keep on. And so now it's become a topic that I think is out there with a lot of people right now.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. What was that poem about, the wind blowing two ships, one's going one direction, one's going the other direction, but it's a matter of the way the sail is set. And so if we're thinking in terms of resilience relating to that, we all go through these difficult times. Some people come through those difficult times stronger, and some people seem to come through those difficult times broken.
Mhm.
What makes the difference?
Yeah, I mean that if we can figure that one out for ourselves and for our teams, we've got the answer then, right? Then it's just implementing it. I think this is a bit where the GRIP-Birkman and the way we approach things is really helpful, is because I don't think that's the same for everybody. So I don't think if we just came up with a answer, it would fit universally.
Hmm.
I, because you see people going through the same situation and maybe doing the same things and yet coming out in their own life as they process through it quite in a different place. I think this is to understand people, to help them understand themselves, and then for us to understand how we function together, so that we can stand strong and process well, and yeah, as teams, as brothers and sisters in Christ, be able to help each other identify what is it that is really helping us be stronger, building into us, equipping us, and what is it that is pulling from us. Um, we talk a lot about different things, getting your needs met, 65-35, all of these things. Um, I think those are all pieces to it, but we recognize they're not the same for everybody. So it's a bit of helping each other uh, understand where we are in those things. I think, and let me just say, I'm no expert in this. I'm struggling through this as well, doing a lot of learning, a lot of reading right now, trying to find ways to be resilient myself and build that.
Those of us that are working with international workers, people who are going cross-cultural and living as expats in other cultures, the flexibility thing is so important. If they have been building flexibility over their lifetime, uh, some of the people that we see going overseas have been through some pretty horrible experiences, and they are very strong people. There's some other people who have lived in pristine conditions, been in the church all their life, have Christian parents, and but they've never really experienced life, to be real honest. And they get overseas, and something horrible happens, and they are the ones that end up falling apart.
Mhm.
Um, so, being able to build that flexibility emotionally, spiritually, mentally, to be able to be flexible with those circumstances is so important for people going cross cultural. And what we recognize also is that the world we live in is we are all experiencing a cross cultural adjustment,
Mhm.
no matter where we live, even if we're not moving to another country.
Yeah.
That there's an aspect of that cross cultural adaptation that we have to do, just living with other people, right?
And I think there's flexibility is really important. I think in a changing world, we have to be adaptable as well. I think sometimes we can be flexible, or we think we're being flexible for a certain amount of time, hoping that things will get back to the way they were, right? And so we're just like, I'll just hold on, and soon enough, COVID will be gone, the racial tensions will be gone, the political thing will be gone, and we'll get back to normal, whatever it might be. Or over here, the war will end, we'll get back to normal. But I think what is actually the reality is that we need to adapt just as much as we need to be flexible. So we need to be flexible maybe with our own expectations, but along the way, to be resilient, we have to be adapting to our surroundings, because if not, I think we're going to try and hold on to what I did before, thinking that will somehow carry me through the future. And on a personal level and on a team level in ministry, I think there has to be adaptation and building and growing if we're going to be resilient going into the future. Otherwise, we're longing for something that's probably never coming back to us. And that, if we think, oh, I'm just being flexible for a while and it'll come back, I think that's probably an unreal expectation. And eventually, carries on long enough, will put us in a place where we realize it's never coming back. I'm out, and so that's when resiliency stops. Then when you find that I can only flex so much and I haven't adapted. So I think flexibility is so key, right? As things get thrown at us, but I think there has to be adaptability as well. And I think this is an interesting one when it comes to working in teams or ministry teams or working with others. What does that look like to adapt our teams together in order to help us move forward in the future?
John coined the word bendiness
That was a good one.
and boundaryness.
Yeah, that's right.
But you know, and I like the coined words.
Let's be gentle with the words here, gentlemen. Let's be gentle, please.
Yeah, John. I mean, come in, John, because what you're talking about there, the flexibility, but also adaptability. How do we set those boundaries to know when I need to just be flexible, but I'm going to come back, you know, from it eventually? And how do I know, no, this is a time that I really need to adapt? How do we do that, John?
You know, I think where my mind goes is uh, the the bendiness is situational. The boundaryness is really I need to understand myself so that I can have a proactive approach to how this happens. And I think for me, that's the bigger deal. Do I understand what those things are, what those boundaries should be, so that when I step on the other side of it, it sends off a warning flag. And I'll use you know, in the Birkman side, you know, of the GRIP-Birkman, in that space, do I know when I'm starting to see that stress behavior and it's triggering sort of, hey, I know that I've stepped outside of this, that it's gone on for too long. That's the boundary, and understanding, putting those boundaries in place then allows me for a short time to to be bendy, to, you know, to pull into that and understand then that, hey, this is an odd circumstance where I'm going to need to push through this for a short time, but I know that I'm beyond my boundary, and having that awareness that I'm in a space that I can't sustain. I don't think a lot of people have really processed through what the line is. And so they just keep trying to push that line a little bit further every time. And so they don't know what they're trying to get back to anymore. And I think that's really what we're experiencing. You know, I'm working with a couple of groups right now where I don't think they know what the right line is that they're trying to get back to. They just know that they're beyond it right now. And so that leaves you in this place of, you know, burnout or pseudo burnout, or I can push through for a little while longer, which is really just self-neglect on your way to burnout. That's not helping us then get into a place of, you know, of true resilience, of I know what I need to get back to. I know how I'm going to refresh, and I'm beyond it right now. I'm coming back to it.
Les Cool had a comment that's right in line with that, John, that self-awareness is vital. Honest self-awareness is priceless. Les, you want to comment any more on that?
One of the things that I know I struggle with is always thinking I can do one more thing or one other thing, just because I'm not exhausted or I'm not sensing it. And so I've surrounded myself with a couple of accountability partners who help me be more honest about my self-awareness. At the end of the day, I don't know very many of us want to say, well, I just didn't, I couldn't. And so sometimes we need help doing that. You know, as we think about boundaries, stepping outside the boundaries, how long can I be outside the boundaries? You know, at what point does bendy become snapped? You know, sometimes we need help, but recognizing that I need to be aware, even if I need help doing that.
Let me add one more thing to that, and that would be knowing where your anchors are. And John, I think I was hearing you kind of hinting at that. If we know where our anchors are, then that helps me to know also how much do I need to bend and where do I need to draw the line and say up to that point and that point, no more beyond that.
I like the term anchors, and I think for us in our community, it's about relationships, right? And relationships aren't how do I escape people so that I can do whatever. It's how do I lean in effectively in relationships and allow us to function as the body of Christ through these seasons, right? How do we do this together? And so I think anchors is also relational anchors. Who are those individuals that are the life-giving relationships? And that's not all groups are not that way, but some are. And so really understanding that difference. And I think again, as as coaches, we have that opportunity to guide people away from our culture's thinking of get away, take a sabbatical, escape for a while, and then come back, really into a let's build this. What are those things that we can consistently do that will build this? What are those anchors for you that are life-giving, that pull you back, in that space that you're able to do?
Mm-hmm.
And Matt, how do spiritual gifts play into this?
Well, that's a great question. Let me just comment there on what John was saying and where we started on a journey, because I think self-awareness is the beginning of the journey. It's certainly not the end of the journey. I think self-awareness leads us to good self-care, which is also not the end of the journey. But that's got to be there. We have to be self-aware so that we can do good self-care. Sometimes we feel, and I think particularly in the United States, that feels very individualistic. I don't think it is. I think that's a wrong understanding of self-care. But we go from self-awareness to self-care so that we can continue to be effective in the things that we've been called to as a body of Christ. So I think those things are pieces in the process or in the journey there as we're going along. As far as spiritual gifts, I like where John put it in the article, because I think when I first read it, I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. But as I was thinking about it, I think it's the right spot when you're thinking of that successful adapting, or that how do I live out in this difficult time, and to go back to those places that do bring the power, the joy, the fruit of the Spirit into our life. And this is where I've seen people really struggling, even this last weekend as I was with the church, when people are too long out of that, then those things that fill life are missing, and they are pouring themselves without the purest of hearts and the purest of motives, but those are missing. Those things are the things that build us back up, not on a selfish basis, but in the Spirit. Those are life-giving. And if we spend too much time missing those. So I think it is helping each other, again, with understanding, self-aware, so we can take care of ourselves, but so we can take care of each other, make sure, are we in those places? And like Les was just saying, having people to help us recognize, am I in those places? Or am I spending too much time saying yes to a lot of activities that aren't going to leave me there? And that can be really a difficult thing sometimes to make the adjustments along the way, but we've got to, I think, to make sure that we're in that good spot.
That thriving as a group, learning to really be aware of each other's needs, emotional health, spiritual health, physical health, that really is key, isn't it, to building this resilience. And if someone doesn't have a community, a team that they're a part of, where they feel that other people really do care about them, care about their health, enough to even sometimes perhaps be a little bit invasive, but because they really care, not because they're being meddlers, but because they really do care for this person. That thing of thriving it seems to me, is very important here.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the point of others. I just think, man, maybe that's a difference between self-care, although I would say that's a community activity too, and resiliency. Self-care is maybe just protecting myself, maybe giving myself space, but resiliency is helping us be successful and effective and moving forward, holding on, but not just to survive, but really to go forward well. And I think we really need others involved in that. I think resiliency is a joint thing. We'd like to think maybe we can just build resiliency into ourselves all alone, but I don't think that's what the Bible teaches. I don't think that's what we see either in people's lives. I think, James 1, talking about the testing of our faith, produces perseverance so that we can endure and be whole. But he's talking to a group of people there. He's not talking to each of us, do it on your own. And I think to your point, resiliency and thriving is when we can do those things with each other, which is really hard, right? In difficult times. We're a group of men right here. Our tendency typically is not to become vulnerable in tough times. It's to man up or strengthen or seem strong. So we have to break that tendency, and be able to share with each other in order that we can stand during the tough times. I love the anchor one. I think is a great picture because the sea can be rough and that boat can be rocketing all over, but it's not going anywhere, right? Because it's got the anchors, and I think that's where the community can provide anchors that help us be resilient.
Les, unmic there because I want you to maybe comment a little bit more. Is serving out of our gifts a part of personal health? Or can part of health, or is it just be a part of health? And if so, can hiding from life be detrimental?
Yeah, I'm wondering, as I'm listening here, I'm wondering if our resiliency, part of that is community.
Yeah.
And we've been wired by God with spiritual gifts that infuse us with power to serve, out of which we find joy and we produce fruit. And I'm wondering if just in the act of continuing to do what we've been empowered to do is actually a form of self-care, rather than sitting on a shelf. And I say that thinking back over the last couple of years where I've watched a number of my peers kind of wither because they backed off because of COVID, whereas I, not consistently, but more often than not, figured out how to work with it. So my friends stopped doing visits. I did different kinds of visits. I stood in front yards in my winter coat, talked with people on their front porches. I stood outside windows at nursing homes with a nurse holding the window open for a resident inside. I went to my office as often as I could, even though the building was old or was empty. And sometimes it was cold to have little space heaters because I don't want to heat the whole building. I continued to exercise my gifts. And I found at the end of the main part of COVID, whatever that is, I was still pretty healthy. Whereas my friends were now looking for counsel and support groups, and I actually led some of those. And so I'm wondering, is doing what we're designed to do part of being healthy?
Yeah, and I hear you saying also there was a lot of adapting and adjusting to the external and internal demands coming there.
But you have to adapt if you're going to keep using your gifts. Because, if you've got people gifts and you can't be around people, how do you do that? So you have to figure out, how do I be around people? And how do I adapt to that? Window visits, front yard visits. Ultimately, we've mastered, well, at different levels, we've mastered social media and different tools, but that's not the same. So there's nothing like seeing the person right there in front of you, and not a 2 by 2 inch square. And I've got 7 of you there, but
But if
it's
this is the best we can do,
yeah.
I mean, given the circumstances, I mean, I would love to have a real cup of coffee with Matt on a weekly basis. Physically, that's a little bit impossible with me being in Montgomery, Alabama, and him being in Czech Republic. That's not going to happen, but we can get together regularly by this wonderful medium that the Lord has provided for us. It's not the best, but it's next best. And if we can't have things the way we want them, should we just not do it at all, or should we adapt and do the best we can?
And those that did came out of COVID less damaged than others, and some actually thrived.
And that's a great point about, in isolation. The truth is that our gifts are not meant for isolation, right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. Even the way we understand and talk about the gifts, there's no way in isolation that I can effectively be using my gifts, because they're meant to be in between people. They're interpersonal. They're blessing others. So if we isolate too much, There are times when we need to pull a bit away and be refreshed for a moment, to relax, to rest. But our gifting is interpersonal, and so isolation really limited that at times. And so to be engaged, to stay engaged with people, to find ways. You're right. It's different, and there's a lot of things. Part of our adapting is, can I be real on a screen without just needing to uh, present a nice picture? But can I be? Can I really journey with someone together in a vulnerable, transparent way? I have to choose that, because truth is, if we're not sitting together, I can make all of my room here look really nice and all that, and you don't see the mess on the other side of the screen, because that's the way we have that chance now. So we have to make some intentional choices. But I love your point, Les, that our health comes from continuing to use our gifting, which means we've got to engage, and that's a part of self care, is that we're doing that in ways that fit our gifting. That I think leads us towards some resiliency. You isolate too much. I think that's where self-awareness again is a good starting point, but doesn't get us to where we need to be unless we take that awareness and do something good with it.
Related to that, in the article, John did mention the 9 components of behavior in the Birkman method that our Birkman report draws from. And Steve, you mentioned your curiosity. It says, I'm curious about the connection between flexibility, a strength that we can grow, and the insistence piece from the Birkman components. Do people with low insistence benefit from greater ability to adapt? And those of you that might just be coach trained, but not signature trained with the Birkman, that insistence is a yellow behavior, very strong yellow behavior. Steve, you want to expound on that just a little more? Your thoughts and comments about that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in persistence, it measures kind of your ability to either go with the flow, or your ability to insist on a certain pattern. And yeah, hearing what you said lastly about the pasture's success or lack of success in COVID, I wonder if folks who were low on the insistence might have had a much easier time in COVID, because that meant that they had a much more consistent approach, kind of naturally. Yeah, and it's really got me thinking about when we share about how flexibility is really important for resilience. And I wonder how much is flexibility a learned skill, and how much of it is, as Berkman would say, kind of an insistence, something that's ingrained or fixed within us.
Yeah, what about that, Matt? And any of the other rest of you that might want to kick in on this, the idea that from a personality standpoint, that person with a high insistence wants to have systems that are set and wants to follow regular patterns. So how does that fit in with the need for flexibility?
That's tough, and I mean, I think you could probably answer that question better than some of us, Larry. But I think, boy, that's a tough thing, isn't it? And then to help people probably find the anchors that are solid, so that they don't feel like the whole world is shifting on them. And maybe that's where we can help each other, is to say, okay, I hear you. It feels like the whole ground is shaking, but that's not actually the case. Let's talk that through, so that we recognize what are those firm things haven't changed, so that I can weather the storm. Because and people maybe who are not inclined to that as much, that's where a team really can help each other. Whereas they might see other people who seem like they have no trouble with all of these changes, and that could even bother them more, right? Because they're like, why am I struggling so much, when they seem to be able to weather that? I think those conversations can be really important for people.
Mark McGowan, you're a master trainer and a Birkman authorized trainer, versed in Birkman. I'm curious if you've got any additional thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think the insistence is also really something that is important to look at, with someone's needs and how they prefer people to insist on how things should be done or what needs to be done. is really key, I think, in times of this change. But it's also helping that person who might be a lower insistence need to see how can we maybe build some new systems, or how can we, or the higher insistence need, sorry, how can we build some new systems, or how can we reframe the current changes in a way that they understand, instead of just staying in this this is everything is moving too fast, or I'm not really tracking with what's going on. I was also looking at restlessness and insistence together too, as a combination, because for those that aren't signature trained, restlessness is your approach to maybe variety versus concentration, is a way to say it. But a combination of a high restlessness and a low insistence is someone who's really responsive and flexible to most things that are going on. But if someone is the person that we might want to, in this world that's always changing, we might want to just be aware of, is someone who maybe have a low restlessness score, high insistence, which tends to be more of, let's use the map, let's keep focused. And so that person might be the one that might be struggling in this time of change.
I'll ask all of you guys, do you think that means that really and truly some people are hardwired to be more resilient than others?
Yes, if we're thinking it's a journey. No, if we think it's a point in time. I mean, because I think about myself, my insistence scale is over on the 60 side. So I'm not as free as some others, but my flex, or my need for variety is like 96, 98. So between the two of them, and I just wrote there, COVID was a free source of variety for me.
Okay.
You know, I didn't have to go looking for something new to do. Every day offered dozens of new things to do. And so that fed me. But because I'm organized, I figured out how to do my organization differently. So yes, as long as you're thinking journey, but you're thinking a point in time, absolutely not.
And I think with Larry's point, I'd say there are people who are more naturally inclined, but I wouldn't say that people who may not be as naturally inclined can't learn how to be more flexible. So I'm agreeing with Les here. That, yeah, in one point in time, but overall, I think someone can learn how to do this. But I think there are people who tend to be more naturally going with the flow, that are really succeeding easier because of that.
Matt, I would think that means that we've got some external and internal adjustments going on, depending on what the circumstance is, right?
Yeah, and that's different for each person, right? We, step back to our basic in each of the quadrants. What is going on there is different. What's adjusting? What are we struggling with? Maybe what is the time that creates an internal struggle? During COVID, there were a lot of people who couldn't get much things done. There wasn't accomplishing a whole lot of things, or maybe in certain areas there was a lot of isolation. There wasn't a lot of communication between people. Those were unique times because of some of the internals and external things that kind of came against each other. And so to navigate the complexity of those sorts of things, I think, again, some people, as we grow, and I think, Mark is a great point, that we do grow, we get better at these things because we're learning. But those come through tough times, right? And we didn't start out just having this all ingrained in our head. So that's where I think when we're doing team building or walking someone through, we're helping them to understand themselves, but we're also watching and teaching so that along the way, as other situations come, they're going to have skills and knowledge to be able to weather that, if we can use a term, or become resilient in those times, rather than be thrown. Because someone who's very flexible might seem like they can roll with the punches, but along the way, somewhere, they can feel like they're lost in it all. Things have just continued to change. And that's where someone who's maybe a little bit more firm, they might have trouble. They might be less bendy, for John's word there. But but there's a sense maybe of identity that they've got that someone else maybe wishes they had, you know. And so I think on both ends there can be this struggle that, again, as coaches, but as the body of Christ together, plays such a vital role in being able to encourage and help each other.
Related to that, the article includes a number of good coaching questions. These are there in the article to give you just a little bit of starter fluid. Well, it's a lot of starter fluid, man. That's a whole can of it. To get the fire going with the dialogue with the people that you will be coaching, to help them to evaluate themselves how they're doing in terms of flexibility. That very first question, thinking about your underlying needs, your needs or expectations. And when John relates that to the gas tank, by the way, there's another Coach's Cafe and an article about is your gas tank empty or full? You can look that up on our YouTube channel. Thinking about your underlying needs, if that's your gas tank, how full is it? Asking the person to do just a quick little self-check, and what has been filling their tank, what has been taking gas out of the tank, and thinking about some of the things that we can perhaps control as we want to build up our resiliency. And there's just a whole list of really good questions. If you haven't read the article, I want to direct you to go to GRIP-Birkman.com/resilience-in-ministry. You'll see that full article there with some really good questions. I'm copying those questions, and I've got them set out in a separate little cheat sheet for me as I'm talking to people, so that if it seems that we're talking about resilience in a coaching session or in a team building session, here are some questions that I want to have close at hand to share with them. That thing of being a good coach and asking good questions, I think in this particular case is really, really important, don't you?
I have a question or a pondering. If our Birkman report is well done on our part, answering questions accurately, and we get a portrait of ourselves. And I remember sitting through my training with you, Larry, and you're talking about that usually won't change unless there's some kind of significant trauma in our lives. And then as we settle into a new normal, we may find that our scores will shift. I'm wondering if not just a trauma, but a lengthy experience like COVID and some of what Mark said, you know, we can learn new behaviors. Could it be that there will be a number of people who are different when they settle into whatever their new normal is on the other side of COVID?
To be real honest, I'll say that I don't think so.
Okay.
I think for a short period of time, there may be some things that people will have adjusted, but when it comes right down to it, their effective usual style is still pretty much going to be the same. Their underlying needs are still pretty much going to be the same, unless there was something that really and truly would cause, you know, a real change in their personality. Mark, you wanted to comment on that too?
Yeah, what we've seen, Leslie, and just the whole, we're doing a research project now with people retaking with B reports within our organization. What we're seeing is that about 85% of what on a retake stays is similar to when they first took it 15 to 20 years ago. There are changes, especially within the map. You'll see some changes because map data doesn't pull from as much of a pool of data as others. And so you answer one or two questions wrong and it can send your map going in a very different direction. But as far as the component wise, you would see a 20-point difference, about 85% will be similar.
Scores will change, but the patterns don't seem to change, right,
No.
Mark?
Right. So you don't see it. We're not seeing a lot of change over time, but we do see some change and some components do shift, but it's overall the reliability and validity over time within Birkman is seemed to be off the charts high.
Recently, I was running a report for someone who actually did a paper version of the questionnaire back in the 1980s. His data is still in there. And we ran his report, and he looked at it and he said, "Still got me. You know, hit the nail. The nail is still in the same place, and the hammer's still hitting the nail." So the validity is constantly being re-examined, at Birkman periodically, and it still remains extremely highly valid. Mark, you wanted to make another comment, I think.
Well, I was going to shift the subject if someone else wants to keep going with this topic.
No, go right ahead.
One of the questions I liked from John's article was that the one about interest and trying to get people to engage in the things that they're the interest. I'm finding that a lot of people, I ask that question all the time, and the people who really are doing the activities, whether within their job or outside their job, are really the ones that are most motivated. Or in these times of where we're trying to build resiliency, finding ways to do those really helps center them or calm them down from the stress and be able to refocus to go back into a stressful situation. So I've been spending more and more time talking about that question 3 and about interest and making sure that people are working and doing the types of activities that they're interested in doing.
I am so glad you brought that up, because a lot of our joy in our work environment comes from how well placed are we to be able to be addressing our interests. And how many times people are in jobs that don't take their interests into account, and that is so draining to them. One of the questions I often have to ask people is, okay, if your job's not providing that for you right now, then how are you getting this need met? Because if you've got a very high interest, it's a high need in your life. So what are you doing to get that met outside of your work environment? But wow, when we can coach teams to say, hey, we've got job assignments here. Who has a high interest in this area? If we could get those two aligned, then we would really increase the productivity and the longevity of team members, wouldn't we? So I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, that the interests are an important component of this. Matt, you wanted to comment some more on that.
Yeah, well, I really like that point, Mark. I appreciate that highlighting that, because I think the reality is that we care as believers and as people. We care about a lot of things. So we look around our world and we care about a lot of things, but that doesn't mean it's going to be an interest in the way that Birkman's using it there that's actually going to be meaningful to feed into our lives just because we care about it. So I have a lot of people that I work with who care deeply about things and think that because they care, they should probably spend their life doing that kind of stuff or working in that area. And it's really devoid maybe of some of those interests. And eventually that just wears them out, right? And it doesn't mean that they're not caring appropriately. It just means that they haven't differentiated between being a caring person and caring for the things that God cares for, and those areas of interest in life where I need to be aware so that I can make sure that those are a part of me. And maybe in some ways that goes back to the point you were talking about a minute ago in Les's question about, do we change? Because I think sometimes we can look at who we are, whether we've looked at the Birkman, that's really helpful, gives us some language there, or just in general, looking at who we are, and we think, in this situation, I wish I was different, or I want to be different. And so I need to change who I am in order to be resilient, or I need to change who I am in order to be able to do this situation. But there are some things about us that just don't change. We're going to grow, we're going to learn. But if we're expecting that somehow I'm going to grow out of who I am into some other person, 20 years later, we're not, right? So I think the reality of that, and not pushing people, yeah, you need to grow past this need in your life. That's not the way those work. But to recognize what are these things, to just be honest about it with ourselves. I need to be honest with it about myself so that I can respond and not figure I can do that. And again, I think sometimes in spiritual communities, we struggle with this because we're taught to die to ourselves, and we misthink on that, what that means. And so we handle that incorrectly, and we end up dying. We literally start to die rather than the appropriate understanding of laying our lives down. We end up dying. And I think when I think of resiliency, I think God's desire is that we burn bright, not that we burn out. And so this is understanding so that we move towards continuing to burn bright and not living in ways that are just going to snuff the fire or burn out in the end. But I like that point about being real. We are who we are as God's created us. Let's not bemoan it or fight it. Let's learn to live in it well.
I know a person who had to take the Birkman 3 times before he got the report he wanted. With that thought there, folks.
keep trying.
Yeah, keep trying. That's right. But yeah, so yeah, and that is important too. Our brokenness, yeah, it does lead us to change. But at the same time, or I should say, and at the same time, that change may not necessarily change completely our personality. We can still be who we are. The change may be growth. I liked an old book that had the title Learning is Change and Change is Growth. So for us to grow, we have to change something, and that comes from our learning. And as we are learning in this process, from who we are, being comfortable in our own skin, so to speak, this is how God has designed me now. Given this, how can I continue to grow to be the very best that God expects me to be, so that I can be the most productive for His kingdom, the most useful to Him, right? And in that context of team, how can I help the body to be more productive? It's not just me being productive, me producing fruit. As we've mentioned over and over again, it is the unity of the body, isn't it? And with that, folks, we come just about to the top of the hour, and that might be a good place for us to stop, to say, hey, I hope this has been helpful to you as a coach, that you can take these principles and you can apply them as you're helping individuals and teams grow in their resiliency so that we can adapt to the circumstances around us. And in doing so, we can remain healthy. That will then allow us to produce healthy fruit, which is what we're about, right? So just keep doing what you can, folks, to build unity in the body of Christ so more people will know Jesus. God bless you, and bye-bye now.